let's talk about whether you can become rich without rich parents. I was very lucky to communicate with people from very different backgrounds during my lifetime, and this all happened because of different schools I was studying in. During my school years, I have changed quite a lot of schools and even once changed countries, moving from my motherland to the UK for some time and then moving back. Because of that, I got educated in schools for very different demographics. In the very childhood, I started to study at simple neighborhood school, and it mostly had people from not very successful families, let's say. It had people where families have been alcoholics, where the families haven't been full, etc. So, pretty much just normal average families, right? Where not everything is very fine. Of course, there people also have been different. Some had full family where two parents have been making some sort of income, others had only one mother who has been an disabled person and they were living on the pension of this disabled person, which in Eastern European countries, let's say, is not that big. So, as you understand, the people have been of a certain class, right? And by the way, while I'm talking about all of that, I do not want to say that any of these people, whether rich or poor, are better or worse, right? What I'm talking about here is just how their start, how their beginning, and how your environment will affect you and your wealth in the future, because not everyone gets lucky, and there is nothing bad about being a poor person or being born in a certain family. That's just a disclaimer for you all, right? Because we just do not choose it. We are just born in the place and family where we're born without like having an influence on it. During my first 5 or 6 years of school, I have been studying with such people, and I didn't understand it quite well because it's very important to state that I myself do not come from a rich family. I consider myself a middle class, and not middle class in the sense that we have been writing, I don't know, Bentleys, not Rolls Royces. No, that's not that. I actually come from a middle class family, and you will have to just believe me on my word, so we can continue. So I was studying with these kids, and I didn't actually see any kind of, differences between them and me because I was a young kid. Until a certain point when I grew up a bit, I don't know how old I was, probably like 10 or 11 years old, and I started to understand that they are kind of treating each other, their parents, and the teachers kind of differently from me, right? They are talking to them in a different way, they are kind of disrespectful to them, etc. And that's what caught my eye just because I was raised a bit differently. I was raised to, respect, let's say, the teachers, right? I could have never argued with the teacher or said some bad words to him when I was a kid, it was just something unacceptable. But lots of other kids have been able to do that. And that was the first time when I noticed the difference, right? That they are behaving a bit differently. Then I started to notice other things, things that were normal to me, like getting a new shoes for summer or winter, which thank God my family have been able to afford, wasn't something as usual for them. And so when I was coming to the school in new, I don't know, Adidas shoes or whatever, people started asking me, how did you afford it? Are you rich or something? And that was the point I realized that something is probably wrong either with me or with them. And since I was a very kind of polite kid in the childhood, I thought that maybe I'm doing something wrong, and I didn't understand why they're actually kind of asking. And then they started, of course, bullying me in one way or another. But yeah, that was it, and it didn't come to any kind of bad situation. It was just how I was living there. But at that point I started to realize that we're kind of living in different environments, let's say. And with the years these kind of gaps just started to grow emotionally, because I started to realize that they are kind of coming from different background and they can afford absolutely different things, and they're thinking in different categories. But we will come back to the thinking and to like overall view on the world later, right? But first I will finish with the story about my school. Then in the middle school I moved to a better school, which still was just a school, just a normal school, not a private one. You didn't have to pay for it. It just had kind of entrance exams, and you had to earn your place in it in one way or another. or at least have good grades. I do not remember exactly, but it was something like that. And I myself really wanted to come to study to this school because I wanted a better education, because they have been educating you more in depth on different subjects, and one of those was English language, and I was very interested in English language since it's not my mother tongue. It's just something I was very interested since my childhood, and it doesn't matter as much. So I entered this school in the grade 8 or 9, something like that, and there I met kind of different people. Like, most of the people have been coming from also middle class families, but as you know, middle class can be very different. Middle class can be very different, and so some of those people have been coming from the same families of the same income level as mine. Others have been coming from very rich middle class families, and there have been also some actually rich and wealthy guys. And that's when I realized that the difference between me and the children in the previous school has been specifically the class of the family where we are coming from. And I'm not talking about, feudal system of class divisions. No, by no means. But I'm talking about the income level. Because with the income level, not always, but very often, the different kind of cultural and educational um, milestones are being achieved by the children just because they have more opportunity because of money. It all ends up in the money kind of field. But yeah, that's how it works. And I saw this like different people again from different backgrounds, from different kind of classes. And it also was very interesting because I didn't belong to kind of with all of them, right? There, of course, have been kids that have been quite similar to me, and I was very thankful for that, and I was able to find the common grounds with them and to communicate with them successfully. But there also have been kids that have been, buying Gucci shoes and something like that, and going around and bragging about that all the time. And the expensive clothes has been something, the pretty much the only thing that they have been valuing and talking about. And I felt very wrong. I felt very wrong, and I felt that this is very wrong because that shouldn't actually be the case, because why would you actually fall for these brands, and why would you think that you are better than other people because of the brands, right? But that was the case there. That was the case there, and I didn't like it. That being said, I of course would love back then to have these shoes because I thought that those look cool. But it's not that I didn't like the shoes, right? I didn't like the kind of behavior of these kids. I thought that maybe because of the money they are too arrogant, right? And they are behaving in a way that's, let's say, is unpleasant. Is unpleasant, especially to other less wealthy kids. I think this situation is normal all around the world, by the way. This is not something specific to my case or my country. But I got to observe these people. And I got to make some conclusions that actually we are different because of the money our families make, right? We are different because of the backgrounds we are coming from, and these backgrounds are mostly influenced by money. Then time went on, and I had to move to the United Kingdom, where I studied for about half a year, maybe even more. It also wasn't a private school, it was just a public school with the boarding on site, where you could have slept, lived, and eaten. And since I wasn't kinda native to the UK and I had nowhere to live, I stayed in this boarding house. I was living in this boarding house for half a year, and there I saw people, as I said, the kids from all around the Europe, um, from very different families. The most important thing is that all of the kids that have been studying here, most of them had some sort of a goal to go into the good university. And I also had such a goal. And that was what I loved about being there. Because most of the kids, which I was like living with at the time, my classmates, my course mates, or whatever you can call them, most of them had kind of a motivation to get into the good schools and make lots of money. And that's something that was different from previous two places where I was studying in, right? Especially from the like very first school, right? Of course, but when I was studying back there, we as a children have been younger, but still I, of course, had contact with some of the friends from these schools, and they were not thinking about going into good universities. They were not thinking about building good careers long term, etc. And it's not their fault. They just didn't have such an opportunity and an example of their parents. But here, everyone did, and I did myself, and I was kind of studying hard, trying my best to go to the best university possible. After living there for half a year, because of the life circumstances, I went back to Latvia. And during my last 2 years in school, I studied in a private school. So, as you can see, I went from a very, very normal, like, neighborhood school where people have been pretty poor mostly, to, let's say, a middle class school, to an English school, which was like different, lots of different people from different backgrounds, right? And then for the last 2 or year and a half, I went to a private school. Again, not the best private school in the country, but it was a private school. And there I met people who have been studying in private schools for all their lives. And it was quite an experience. Because I realized that these people lived in a completely different bubble, in a completely different environment, in a completely different lifestyles, you know. Um, how to explain it? It was a cultural shock, right? Because pretty much nobody's mom has been working. Pretty much everyone had brand clothes. Lots of people had new cars when they were driving to school. Lots of people had rich and very rich parents, right? There also have been kids from middle class families, same as I. And I would say that when I was like communicating with these people at my high school, it was nice because most of them have been way more polite, way more educated, way more sensitive than the people from the original school, which I came to when I was a kid, right? And I would say I had more of a common language with these people, just because in some way we have been raised similarly. But at the same time, I was feeling a huge gap between us. Because for some of them, they just didn't have to work a day in their life and they still would have more money than I will make in my whole life. And that's okay, because that's life. But it's very interesting when you come to this environment when people also, they of course have been thinking about getting a good education, etc., etc., but lots of them um, didn't even like have to do it because they had rich parents who could have like built, they already built an entire life for them, an entire like everything for these children, right? And so they had kind of other goals in life. Of course, they wanted to get the education, but they were thinking on different level. Not lots of them wanted to go and work for someone or somebody at some company, or even go to the good school to go like to the best companies. Most of them wanted to open their own businesses or continue the businesses of their parents. I wouldn't say I belonged there because, yeah, I don't come from a family which is even a bit close to this kind of circle. I would say that I got very, very, very lucky to meet these people and meet all of the previous people because it taught me quite a lot about how society functions and how different people with different backgrounds, right? How do they go through life? What kind of starting points they have, and what kind of starting point I have, and how to proceed with that, and how to communicate with each of these different people, social classes, social levels. And here comes my conclusion. Because this video is actually called not my high school and school story. It's called whether you can become rich without rich parents. I would say that while learning in these different institutions, I realized that it's, of course, way more difficult for a kid without a good background to become rich, but not only because of the money, let's say, but because of three things. Let's call it wealth. Of course, wealth is money. Anyways, wealth is money, right? But it's built, the money in the wealthy families are built by depending on different pillars. And I wrote down three pillars to myself here, which all, of course, lead to the money, right? The first one is education, overall education, because the more kind of rich families, right, the better education they can afford for their kids. The better the school is where you study, the more expensive it is. The better the university is where you study, the more successful people you can meet there. You can meet there with incredible people from incredible backgrounds, from incredible families, or very smart people, right? Who got there on their own. But you study with exceptional people. That being said, some of them can be awful people, but they are exceptional and their families are exceptional in one way or another when compared to an average population, right? If you go and study, I don't know, in Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, you will see very different people from the average ones, right? And that's a huge thing, not the knowledge that you get. The knowledge is also a good stuff, good professors, stuff like that. But the kind of education that you get by just speaking with these people, by just seeing different perspective, by seeing how they assess life, is way more important. So that's one thing, because you have different horizons open for you. You have different connections. But we will talk about connections a bit later. You have different understanding of life because you have seen it from different perspective. That's the first education type. And the second one is financial. Because what I notice is that most people from the poor families, they are not only poor because they are not making enough money, which of course is the case. It's not possible to argue about that, right? But another very important factor is that they do not know what to do with money at all. They do not know anything about like preserving money, about investing, about saving. And it's very often that people from poorer families, when they get their hands on some money, they just tend to spend it all. And they tend to spend it all on the things that they think are rich people things, upgrading their car, or buying a new phone, or a new laptop, or the newest something device. And that's how their money is gone. um, but if you have a financial education, which definitely is not very often given to the children like directly. It's not very often that mom and dad sit with their kid and say to them, we will teach you how to invest money. No, they teach you how to do it by just living their life and you just looking at them, by seeing how your parents' careers have been developing, by seeing how they have been building businesses, by seeing how they have been saving and investing money, by what kind of things they have been investing into. You can even understand it subconsciously, right? Let's say if you come from a very rich family and your parent has like lots and lots of houses and real estates, and you from the childhood see that he is kind of taking care of it, and your father and mother, right? You see that how they communicate, what kind of businesses they built around it. You just learn from it, and it's impossible to learn it if you do not have such a circle around you, right? So you get the financial education very often subconsciously by just following what your parents have been doing. And that's maybe something even more valuable than a good degree in the university. So that's another advantage that you have. And this all combines into the education, as I said. That's an education. Just the university, the degrees, and the financial education that you can get. The second thing is the cultural wealth. And what I mean by that is, again, I do not want to sound like a snob and say that richer people are better people and etc. But because it is very often that when you come from richer family, you have this cultural education in terms of going out more to the better restaurants, going out to the theaters, just knowing how to behave with other people, knowing how you should be like respecting or pretending to respect other people, which is a very important factor actually. Just knowing how to behave overall, just knowing how to behave and how to speak with other people. And it's also not taught directly very often. It's just you are just mirroring your parents, and since they are more rich and they have like different exposure to different social classes, they just tend to be more culturally well off as well. And uh, very often that these more well-off parents make you read more or study music or study art. And this is not how you make money, but this is how you develop yourself, how you develop your brain, how you develop your overall sense of and taste of like what is good and what's bad. And there you of course meet some people who also are born and raised and taught in this way. So that's another thing. And it's not again directly correlated to money, but it can lead to it. Because if you do not know how to approach people, how to speak with people, how to behave, it is very rare that it is probably not possible for them to let you in their better circle. And the last kind of pillar, as I said, is social capital. This one is very understandable. Those are just simply connections. There is not a lot to talk about, right? If you have connections, um, you are covered in most of the cases, because knowing a guy who knows a guy sometimes is way more valuable than any kind of a degree. That's just how it works. Because we are human beings, and that's how we have been living for centuries and, thousands of years. Because we just love to communicate and do something for people that we know or at least know. That's just how I see it, because that actually works on any level. And of course, if you come from a better well off family, you have better connections. Your family's friends are most probably not working at the local grocery shop as the cashier. They are most probably lawyers, judges, doctors, businessmen, investors, financiers, all this kind of fancy stuff. By just knowing these people, it's way easier to go with your life because you know whom to call, or at least your parents know whom to call in case something happens, in case you need help, in case of an emergency, in case you need to get a job, in case you need to get another job, in case you need to get a business partner, in case of anything. Social connections decide lots of things. And of course, if you come from a poorer background, your connections are mostly cashiers at shops, maybe teachers, unfortunately, because I think teachers must be paid way, way more. And, you know, other people who are also people and they are great, but they cannot help you that much because they do not have money and influence. Because if you do not have money and influence, unfortunately, in this world, you are stuck. All of these three pillars, of course, boost you immensely if you come from a rich family. They boost you immensely and they pretty much guarantee you success if you are not an idiot. Because if you exercise these three things and you are not an idiot, you will be well off as well as your parents. And it will be very hard for you to just, lose it all. In case you are not an idiot, of course. If you're an idiot, it's very easy. And if you're coming from a poorer background, I'm not saying you can become wealthy. You can for sure. But you will need to build all these three pillars on your own. You will have to make lots of mistakes. You will have way less time to then exercise the things which you learned because other people have learned it since childhood, etc. And so I'm not saying that it's impossible. It is possible, but it's just way more harder. And that's kind of the truth that everyone knows, that people from the rich families are doing better. But here I wanted to share my experience because I am kind of in the middle of all of that and has been during my lifetime, right? I actually come from a middle class family and I just got very lucky to study with all of these people from all these different backgrounds and see how they communicate, what they do, what they want in life. I think I got very much blessed to see all of them. And I'm also in the middle of it. My pillars are also not something as I described before. And I'm building my pillars from day to day. But I wanted to summarize that, right? Summarize my experience and summarize my view on it because I see it quite on in-depth level. And here, what I would suggest to myself and to everyone else is to kind of study all three of these pillars, right? Study all three of these things. Not only go for money, but of course, again, money is the most important factor. Just I suggest everyone to make as much money as they can, of course, and yeah. But at the same time, not to forget about these other pillars, right? To develop themselves culturally, to try your best to find some connections and good friends from better circles. Because if you do not come from a wealthy family should be coming from you, right? You should be building one and developing it. And you should be the founding father or mother. Most of the people, they are stuck in their social class for their whole life and they do not seize anything like below or above it. It's fine. because that's how life and society has been functioning for years. But now, especially with the help of the internet, we can discover all of these things way better and way more precisely than people had an opportunity before that. And that's it. No precise conclusion, just something to think about. Just something to think about while you develop yourself and maybe later raise your kids. I hope everyone will become rich and famous, every one of you watching this video, and I am wishing to all of you the best of luck. And yeah, let's never give up to work towards the better future for us and our families. Thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, press the like button and subscribe to my channel. This means a lot to me. And of course, join my Discord server. Link is down below in the description. I will be more than happy to discuss any video of mine with you. And bye for now.